lot of you were not able to make it. We started talking about monitors. We actually did finish semaphores. We started talking about monitors. I'm just going to do a quick recap, start with the definition again. Okay, so monitor is essentially a higher level synchronization construct. Okay. It allows, in most cases it's built into the language, okay, Java being one example that I mentioned. What it does is it basically embeds synchronization primitives into an object-oriented framework. So you can take a class, or more precisely an object, and you essentially can turn it into a monitor which gives it an inbuilt lock and zero or more condition variables. Okay, we'll talk about condition variables in just a moment. So what the monitor does is it automatically provides synchronization. So whenever you call any method on this object, or any method of the class that the object belongs to, okay, it basically automatically grabs a lock. Okay, so before entering the method, you have a lock on the method. So what that means is if there are multiple threads, only one thread can execute any method of that object or that class at any time. If another method calls, let's say foo being the object, you call foo and call a method on foo, it will block by definition because you have to grab a lock before executing the method. Okay? And what condition variables do is they enable a thread to go to sleep inside one of those methods atomically and give up that lock. Okay, so if for any reason you have to wait for something inside a monitor, you use a condition variable, you go to sleep, you give up the lock atomically. This allows some other thread to make progress by entering that method. Okay, so that's the definition of a monitor. I gave several examples. So quick point was, you can take any Java class, turn it into a monitor using one keyword. Okay, you simply add two things you have to do. First, take all the data, make the data private. That means the data can be only accessed from inside the method. Okay, and then you make the method synchronized. So by adding this keyword synchronized to a Java method, what happens is Java internally adds a lock around this object that will instantiate. And anytime you call a synchronized method, you have to actually grab a lock. You meaning the JVM will grab a lock for you. Okay, so you don't explicitly do anything. So monitors built into Java. Okay. Condition variables, as I said, allow you to go to sleep inside a critical section. Okay. Condition variables have three methods. Okay. So what you can do is you can do wait on a condition variable that puts the current thread that called wait for that condition variable to sleep, and it releases the lock that it was holding because it was inside the method. Okay. You can call signal, which will wake up any thread that is asleep on a condition variable. You can do signal all or broadcast on Java, notify all, they all mean the same thing, which wakes up all sleeping or waiting. Okay? So three methods. We typically have not seen the use of this. These two are very similar to what you have seen in semaphores. I mean, just look at the differences, but wait and signal, same operations we saw in semaphore. Okay? Also present on condition variables. Okay. So before I move on, I just want to take a minute to see if there are any questions on monitors, or just for those of you who couldn't make it, I don't know if you have time to review the class slides and whatnot. Any questions whatsoever? Okay, so we'll have several examples of monitors. So to all of the material today is going to build, and you will see how monitors are used to solve useful problems. Before I do that, just want to mention two types of monitors. They're called MESA and core monitors. Okay, so, and they differ in what happens when signal is called. Okay. Remember, when you call a signal on a condition variable, you simply wake up a thread that had gone to sleep. Okay. Wait on a condition variable, puts the thread to sleep, give up the lock. If you call a signal, then you wake up the thread. Okay. Now, if you have a MESA style monitor, and this is what Java has, and this is what Nachos has also. Okay, what happens is when you call a signal, you will wake up the thread. Okay? But that thread will have a content. It does not yet have a lock. The thread that called signal is inside a synchronized method, so it still has the lock. Okay? So the thread that calls signal has retained the lock, Okay, and you just woke up another sleeping thread, and it has to recontend for the lock and so on. So it will actually get the lock at a later time. So the waiting thread has to wait and contend for the lock with other threads that may also be contending for it. Okay? I will explain what all that means in just a minute. If you have a Hoare-style monitor, this is what has been classically used in textbooks, okay, but not actually implemented in a real system. What happens is when you call signal, then you actually hand over the lock. You wake up a thread and you hand over your lock to that thread atomically. So signal not only wakes up another thread, but it actually gives the lock to a waiting thread. So when that thread wakes up, it already has woken up and has reacquired the lock. Okay? So when the thread that was waiting exits, it basically releases the lock back to the signal ether. Okay, let me explain the difference between the two with a simple example. Okay, so this is the same class implementation, that's not a class, a Q implementation using a Hoare-style monitor. So what happens is here is add method to the queue. It has put an item on the queue and you just call notify. It says if any other thread is asleep waiting to take an object from the queue and the queue was empty, go wake it up. Okay, so you call notify, you wake up. Okay, now what happens when you call notify in a Hoare-style monitor is that this thread that is executing add will actually transfer the lock over to a thread that was asleep on the remove method. Okay, so here is remove. In here what you've done is if queue is empty, you're going to wait. I need to remove an object from the queue. If the queue is currently empty, I'm going to wait until some other thread comes along and puts an item into the queue. So if the queue is empty, you wait. So you've gone to sleep here. So when you do notify, you basically not only wake up this thread, but transfer the lock over to this thread. Okay, explicitly there's a transfer in the whole monitor. Okay. So now how is this different from a Mesa-style monitor? So the code is very similar, there's just one change, one minor change. That's the code I showed you last time. You'll see that there we had a while. In a Hoare-style monitor you have an if. Okay, so you have to ask the question why. Okay, so in the Hoare-style monitor, you just put an item into the queue. You call notify and you transfer the control to a thread that was sleeping. Okay? So when this thread wakes up, it has the lock, and since you know explicitly that you are woken up, okay, you know that there's already an object on the queue, so you just remove that object and you return. Okay. So you are guaranteed when you wake up here that there is something in the queue. Okay, so that's the reason you want if. In the normal case, which is what you actually have to do in Java, you have to write a while loop there. And we talked about this last time, just as a quick recap. We said that when you're woken up and you reacquire the lock, there's no guarantee that the queue is still non-empty. Some thread called add and it added an item to the queue. Maybe there were multiple threads that tried to enter the critical section. Okay, this thread that was asleep woke up, but there may be some other thread that calls remove at the same time. The scheduler schedules that other thread, it gets to go in and remove the data item, queue becomes empty again. So when the sleeping thread is actually going to get the lock, it has to go back and check again. Is the queue still empty? That's why there is a while there. In a Hoare-style, you are explicitly given the lock by the thread that added a data item to the queue. There's no need to check to know that some thread has just added a lock, so you can just get away with it. Okay. So the real difference between the two is that whenever you write code, in this case you just don't need to do that check again, because you're explicitly woken up and given the lock. You know, nobody else got it in between, because this thread just passed on the lock to this other thread. That's the only difference. But that's really, all this is an academic discussion, because Hoare monitors you will never actually program in practice. You only have Mesa style, so you really have to write code assuming the case that some other thread will come in and do something. So you will have to always double check. So you always write a while in front of a condition variable and wait. Any questions on Hoare style monitors? So quick digression into C++. Java is nice in that support for monitors is actually built into the language. C and C++ don't have that luxury, so you actually have to construct monitors. Not very hard to do that. So you can actually do it this way. So you can basically, so you have to have a condition variable and a lock. So to basically write monitors in C++, you can use a library like such as pthreads, for instance, which have both notion of a lock as well as the notion of a condition variable. So you declare a lock, you declare a condition variable, and this is how you would write the same code I showed you. So you basically have to explicitly lock, acquire, and do a lock release at the beginning and the end. Okay? In Java, as soon as you use the keyword synchronized, automatically the JVM puts internally a lock acquire method instruction as the first line of your method and a lock release as the last line. Okay? So that's automatic. You are not doing it. The JVM is doing it for the language is put support for it automatically. In C++, you have to write that yourself. So you are going to basically surround the entire method. This is equivalent of doing synchronize. You will do an acquire before then you have the first statement, and you do a release before you do a return. Okay, this is how you will actually, any synchronized method, you are going to do the same thing. So there you do an acquire release, here you do an acquire release. The rest of the code looks similar. Okay, so here you will put an item on the queue, and you will do a condition variable signal saying if some thread is asleep, go wake it up. Here you have the same while loop that I was showing you. If the queue is empty, go to sleep, okay, and then some other thread will wake you up at a later time. Okay, and then you remove an item and you release. Okay. So if you have to write monitors in C++, you can do that. It's fairly straightforward. And you can do that by declaring within your class a lock. There should be a declaration of a condition variable here which is missing. You declare a lock and a CD, condition variable, and every method that you want to protect, you protect by acquiring a lock at the beginning and releasing it at the end. And then if you need to go to sleep for any reason, you use a while loop on some condition and you call await on the condition variable. And this is how you would use monitors in C++. Okay. And this is not pthreads code, but if you actually write this in C++, you will use a library such as pthreads. There are equivalent method names for that, but the code is very similar to what I have here. Okay. So bounded buffer I'm going to skip. So the last point I wanted to discuss here was really the difference between semaphores and really condition variables, not monitors. Okay. So you can ask the following question. Okay. So if you have a semaphore, the operations you can do on it are wait and signal. There are condition variable object. You can also do so they have the same operations you can do on this. Okay, so the real question that we want to ask is it the case that we are really using a semaphore underneath and just calling it a condition variable? Is there a difference between a condition variable and a semaphore? Okay, if so, what is that difference? Or if not, can we just use it? Is that clear what I just said? In other words, if I just gave you a semaphore and said now use that semaphore to construct a condition variable, are you just going to say condition variable wait, whenever you call that, just call a wait on the underlying semaphore? If I just have a condition variable signal, would I wrap that around a semaphore or signal? Is that going to allow you to take a semaphore and implement a condition variable? Is the question clear first of all? Okay. So let's ask that question and see. So that's what I basically meant. Can you do this? Will that work? Can you take condition variable and implement it into the semaphore? Okay. So let's understand what each of those two things do. Okay. So the answer is it's not that simple. Okay. You can't just do that. Okay. You want to do something more than that. If you do that, it is not going to work. Okay. And the reason is as follows. You have to really understand the definition of what a semaphore does when you do wait and signal, and the definition of what a condition variable does when you do wait and signal. Okay, let's revisit those definitions and then we'll try to understand what are the differences. Okay. So let's ask the question, what happens when you do a wait on a semaphore?
Subtract 1.
Okay, that's a good recollection of what I said 2 classes ago. So semaphore is an integer. Okay, semaphore is essentially an integer object that you have two methods, a wait and a signal. Wait always decrements the semaphore. Okay. Decrement, and if the value goes negative, you cause that thread to block. That's the definition of a wait. Okay. Wait is essentially a decrement operation on this integer variable, and if the operation after the decrement the value is negative, then you block. The value is not negative, you continue. Decrement and continue, or you decrement and block. This is what happens on a wait. Okay. What does the signal do? It does the opposite. You always increment. So the increment operation on this integer variable, and if there is some thread blocked on it, so you will always increment, and if thread is already blocked on a wait, you will wake up one of those threads. Okay, that's the definition of the wait and signal of a semaphore. Okay. Now let's revisit some condition variables. Okay. What does the wait and the signal in the condition variable do? What does wait do? So the way we have defined is, we said a wait on a condition variable always causes the thread to go to sleep and give up the lock. Okay. That's how we have defined it. So basically whenever you call wait, you go to sleep. That's our definition of what wait does. Okay. And you also give up the lock at all. Okay, what does signal do? Signal wakes up a waiting thread if one exists. Otherwise, it does nothing. Okay. If some thread is asleep, so wake up someone if asleep, and if there's no one sleeping, do nothing. Okay. So now you can ask, can you take this and implement that? Okay, so now that I have revisited the definition, it's time to think a little. So I'm going to claim that the two are not exactly the same. They are similar but not the same. Okay, and I'll explain what the difference is. I will basically make the following observation. I'll say that semaphores have the notion of a state, and condition variables don't. What do I mean by that? The semaphore is inherently an integer variable. It always has a value. Whether it's 0, positive, negative, it has a value. Okay, that value encodes the state of the semaphore. It's saying something about what is happening with that semaphore. Okay. In condition variable, that is not the case. Okay. And the best way to understand what happens between when you do use one or the other is to just try out a small snippet of code. Okay, so here is the snippet that I'm going to put up here. I'm going to give the definitions there. Two threads A and B. Right? In the first case, thread A calls semaphore.signal, and then thread B calls semaphore.wait. Okay, and then in this case, thread A calls condition variable.signal, and then you call condition variable.wait. Question is, what happens to these threads? Okay, so what happens when you call signal?
Increments the semaphore value.
First thing you should ask is, if I ask you what happens at signal, you should say, what did you initialize the semaphore? answer sometimes will depend on what happened to the semaphore. So I didn't tell you what we incremented it. So let's assume incremented the semaphore, or not incremented, initialized it with 0. Okay, without the initial condition, you can't actually solve this problem. But let's assume now you hit 0. So what does signal do? Signal increments. Okay. So what will this do? This will simply change the value to 1. Okay. Now you call wait. What happens? You decrement. Okay. Value will go back to 0. And then what happens to B? It will continue. Okay. 0 is not negative. That's the key observation here. So you will not block. Okay, value just went to 0, and we said that you basically semaphore decrements, and if the value is negative, you block. That's the definition. So you are just blindly following the definition. You decremented it, value went to 0, it's not a negative value. So B is simply going to continue. Okay. That's the behavior. Now let's do this. A does condition variable dot signal. Okay, what does signal do? It says wake up someone if some thread is asleep, or do nothing. So what do we do?
Do nothing.
Okay, so far B has not started running, right? So nobody is asleep. So you are going to say, is there a threat to wake up? No. So you do nothing. So A is not doing anything. Okay. Now B comes along and does wait. Pause wait. What happens? As a wait, always puts you to sleep. Okay. So here. So you see that the two have actually resulted in different behaviors. Here B is not asleep, it actually gets to continue. Here B is blocked. Okay? Different behaviors. This should tell you that they are actually not the same if you just follow the definition. Now you ask what happens if you flip the order of wait and signal. You do wait first and you do signal later, and the same is true in that case. What happens? Let's do that quickly. It sees the behavior different there as well. Okay? So let's say again you initialize this to 0. And B runs first and B calls wait. Okay, what happens? Okay, you will decrement. The semaphore goes to -1. And we said if the value is negative, you will block. Okay? So if you same initialization, if B runs first, B will block. Okay? And if A runs subsequently, you will do a signal. Signal will increment and unblock B. Okay, that's the definition. You basically increment. If some thread is blocked, you wake it up. Yeah? So if you swap the order, B will sleep, A runs, and then B wakes up. Okay, what happens here? Okay, you will call this first.
Goes onto the sleep queue.
Okay, you will basically block because wait always blocks. And then you call signal. Okay, and signal says wake someone up if somebody is asleep. So A will wake up B. So if you swap the order, the two behave identically. First, the thread that calls wait is going to block, and the other thread that runs signal will run and unblock the first thread. Okay, but you swap the order, you get different behaviors. Okay, so in one case they work the same way, in the other case they work differently. Okay, and the reason for that is you actually had state here. Because you incremented and decremented, you actually used the value to do something differently when you did signal. Here, that signal is lost if no thread is sleeping. Okay, there is a do nothing part. It said this signal that you did first here in the for case 1 that I showed you is effectively lost, is not captured. Okay. In this case, you capture it by incrementing the variable. So 0, this goes from 0 to 1. So when this does a wait, you actually go back to 0 and you don't block. Okay, so by virtue of having state, you are actually a different behavior. Yes, question.
So this is not something you use for like a producer consumer thing. It's, you know, if you signaled something to wake up and no one's there, then you have extra stuff on the queue that isn't being used.
So question is, can you then not use monitors to do producers and consumers, because you put signal and there's nobody waiting there, and then you go and you basically lose that signal and then you are in trouble. Okay? So I'll repeat what I said. So just because the two behave differently doesn't mean that you cannot do certain things with this that you cannot. From a overall expressive power perspective, you can solve any problem with either of those. You just write the code differently. Okay? Just because you lost this, you have to write some other code to make sure the code runs correctly. You can't just take the code for semaphore and blindly replace semaphore.signal with condition variable.signal and then expect the code to work. It will not. Okay? So it will not carry over. You will have to write the logic differently. But you can do producers and consumers. Shouldn't be a problem. Okay? Okay. So there is an exercise which shows you how to actually implement monitors with semaphores, which I am not going to go through here. I just want you to go and as an exercise, go and understand. The only thing I will point out is the implementation is not that. You can't say this is basically blind replacement and saying the two are identical. I just showed you that the two are not. Okay, they behave differently. So you can't get the same behavior, but you can actually implement given one another. So you can give semaphores and write monitors, and it is a little bit of work to do. I'm going to leave that as a homework. Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next problem, which is also quite interesting for today, which is readers and writers. Okay. Now, as far as the test is concerned, what I just finished is all that you need to worry about. What I'm going to talk about now, you don't need to worry about. Not for midterm one, you do have to worry about it for midterm one. So don't start tuning off. We'll worry about it in a month from now. Okay? So readers, writers and synchronization. So first let me describe. So what we have done so far is we have finished the discussion of locks, finished the discussion of semaphores and monitors. These are the three synchronization constructs. Remember that our real goal was to understand how to implement them internally. We said you can do test and set, you can do interrupts. So that's exactly what you will use to implement monitors or semaphores or locks. Okay? Now having done that, we are going to address some higher level, what are called classical synchronization problems. Okay? So we'll start with reader writer. I think that we'll probably use up the rest of the class to do readers writer. If we have time at the end, I'm going to do another one called dining philosophers. Okay? They're abstract problems, but widely used. Okay? Whether it's in operating systems or distributed systems or general concurrent programming, you will use these kinds of sort of abstraction. Okay? I'll talk about what reader writers are, then dining philosophers we will hold off on. Okay? So here is the reader writer problem. Okay? We'll assume so let's assume that there is some shared data structure that some threads are trying to access. Okay, let's play. For simplicity, we are just going to make that shared data structure a simple integer. It could be an array, it could be a linked list, it doesn't matter what the shared data structure. Okay, there are some number of threads that are all trying to access the shared data structure. So the first thing you should say is if you are accessing the shared data structure and your threaded code, you need to employ synchronization. You need to protect those accesses with some synchronization primitive, typically a lock. So before you, anytime any of these threads access, you grab a lock, then you do whatever operation you want to do on this variable, read it, modify it, whatever you want to do with it, and then you release the lock. So all of these threads have to follow this principle that before they read or modify this variable, shared data structure in this case, we are going to use a lock. Okay, so we know how to do that. How to just use a lock. Okay, now the claim is that there are certain kinds of problems where a lock is too restrictive. Okay, it does more, it's overkill for what we are trying to do. Okay, and here this is one of those class of problems, and we are going to call this a readers writers problem. Okay, the readers writers problem is as follows. So we'll assume there are these n threads, but we'll partition these threads into two groups. Okay, the first group of threads only reads that variable but never modifies it. We'll call that group of threads readers. Okay, they only read. So they'll just say, what's the current value of y? That's all they're going to do. It won't change that value. Okay, and the other class of threads, as the names reader writer suggests, actually reads it and modifies it. They write to that variable. They actually change the value. Okay. Now you can simply use a lock and say, regardless of whether you are reader and writer, I don't care what you do to the variable, simply grab a lock and then read or write. Okay, and that code will work. Okay, so you could just say, doesn't matter whether they are reader or writer, you simply do this. If all the threads do this, we are done. Okay, that's one way to solve the problem, and the claim is that is not necessary, meaning that that's too strong, as we don't need to do that. And the reason we don't need to do that is the following. So if you want to ensure more concurrency, then what you can do possibly is you can allow multiple readers to read this value all at once. Okay? But have only one, but the restriction is only one writer can write at any time. Okay? Because readers are simply reading. There's no need to actually protect that value with a lock. They're not modifying it. Why not let three threads all read that value all at once? What's the harm? There's no harm done. Okay? But if some thread is actually modifying the value, it should be the only one. It's a shared data structure. So it should be the only one. We don't want anyone else to read or write if some thread is writing. Okay? So we want to now redesign this code by simplifying it, by simplifying, not simplifying it, but making it better. We want more concurrency. Okay? What this simply does is only one thread can do anything at any given time. Some other thread wants to do something to this variable I, it will block. But we have an observation here saying if all these threads are only want to read, then multiple readers should be able to read. Okay? But if a thread wants to write, then you basically only let the thread write at once. Okay? So here are the correctness criteria. Each read or write must happen within a critical section. Okay? We want to guarantee mutual exclusion for writers, which is only one writer at a time. And we want multiple readers to read at the same time. Yes.
Maybe any number of readers?
Yes. So here we say any number. It doesn't matter, 1 thread, 5 thread, 100 threads, they can all merrily go in and read at the same time. But if one writer goes in and starts modifying it, everybody else is blocked. Okay, so how do we solve this problem? Yes.
Do threads declare whether or not they're reading or writing ahead of time?
Yes, good question. So first of all, you need to know what a thread is doing. Okay, threads need to declare, am I a reader or am I a writer? Okay, that information has to be known. Okay, so threads will tell you, or actually you are writing the code for the thread, so you know what your thread is doing. Okay, so you, the programmer, know is this a reader thread or a writer thread. So you will protect it with an appropriate synchronization primitive. Yes.
Well, I mean, from what I can tell so far, it seems like there should be no restrictions on reading at all. And it seems like you don't need any kind of data structure, anything really to restrict that. But you do need like a semaphore and something to prevent a writer from mutual exclusion.
So I'm going to just hold up two more things. I'm going to take that observation and I'm going to put it down. Okay? So I'm going to write the write method. Write I basically says you set I to some value. Okay, that's writing. Okay, so suggestion is readers don't need to be protected. Okay, so you basically just say read, return I, but writers you want to protect, mutual exclusion. Okay, so we'll ask the question, is this what we wanted? There are two more suggestions, hands please.
I think there's a problem with that because say you're on an important system, say a bank, and you're in maybe the middle of a write statement, and someone does a read to maybe do a calculation on the interest that we're going to be applying, and it reads right in the middle of that write statement, editing your account balance. You could suddenly end up with a lot more or a lot less depending on what kind of numbers it's and.
So I'm going to paraphrase what you just said in just a moment, when you had your hand up. Okay, so there's a classical banking example. Anybody who's done concurrency, you always start with a bank and you go and you check your balance, and there's another process that's doing the same thing. But, and then you're in the middle of writing, if somebody reads something bad can happen. That's the point being made. So first question I would ask is, yes, so understand the correctness property. What do we want? Each read or write should be within a critical section. You want to guarantee mutual exclusion for writers, but you want to allow multiple readers. Okay? If you don't have anything here, if the read method simply says return I, okay, and you only have a lock in the write method, are we guaranteeing mutual exclusion for writers? Because what did I say? If a writer is writing, everyone is blocked, not just other writers. The reader is blocked, the writer is blocked. So if there's a write thread right in the middle of here, doing something here, then the read thread comes along and asks for the value of I, it is not going to block, because we just said this is the code for the reader. Okay. So it does not satisfy that. And the example that was just being given is the banking example, is a manifestation of what can actually go wrong. If you're in the middle of changing the value of I, let's say this was a linked list and you're in the midst of modifying some pointers. Right in the middle, you context switch and your read method runs, your data structure is actually broken at that point. You're in the midst of manipulating the pointers to a linked list. You go and start reading that linked list, you will actually cause the data structure to go haywire. Okay, so you don't want to, when you're in the midst, right, variable is a different problem. Like if this was some complicated data structure that you're in the midst of modifying, you modified half of it, not the other half. It's not a consistent snapshot of what it looks like. You'll read something that may end up being garbage, or you may cause the thread to crash. So you don't want this to happen. Okay, so this is not a solution to the reader-writer problem. This is not something. You got a hand on this.
I don't know, just, the only clarification, I guess, is that if it's multi-core, just single core, because if it's an atomic like instruction, you wouldn't have that problem.
Yeah, so question is, there's not a question, but the comment about a suggestion of multi-core, single core, and if this was atomic, it shouldn't cause the problem. So this is just a simple example of a shared variable. This could have been, as I said, a large array, could be a large construct that you're modifying, etc. It could be a database, that was the example being shown there. You're in the middle of adding interest balances to everyone's accounts. The middle of that, if some process comes along and says, how much money do I have right now, it's all off, because some things have been modified, others are not, etc. Okay. So what should we do? What is a better solution? Yes?
Shared locks and exclusive locks.
Okay. So that's a shortcut. So the solution is you use what are called reader-writer locks. Okay. So I should explain it's sort of a cheating way of solving the problem. But here is one solution that I can mention. So Java has a implementation of locks called read-write locks. What read-write locks do is, if you you have to now not acquire a lock, but when you acquire a lock, you have to say, I'm acquiring the lock in read mode or write mode. Okay? If you try to acquire a lock in read mode, it basically allows multiple threads to acquire the lock all in read mode. Okay? But if you acquire a lock in write mode, only one thread can actually acquire the lock at all. So basically this is the code which you do an acquire and write mode, everyone else is blocked if you actually manage to get the lock. That is the reader or write. But multiple threads can call read, and if they all get the lock in read mode. Okay, pthreads also has the same construct, called a reader-writer lock. Okay. That is one way to solve the reader-writer problem, is you actually use a read-write lock. Okay. But assume a world where read-write locks did not exist. How do you implement a read-write lock? That's what you want to ask. Right? So you only have semaphores, you have locks, your condition variables, your monitors. That's all the tools you have at your disposal. Okay, so then we have to ask the question, how can you solve this problem? Okay. So what we will see is actually how you implement read-write locks as an artifact of solving this problem. We will also solve the problem of implementing a read-write lock, and once you have a read-write lock, this problem is easy because the lock by definition allows multiple readers. That is the definition of a read-write lock, but it only allows one writer. But we want to first solve that problem. Yes.
So if you're using semaphores, can you have like the, if you start with 0 and then whatever the maximum is going to be 5, then the write lock is actually going to deduct 5 all at once, or the read can deduct 1 at a time or something.
Okay, so you can have semaphore, you initialize it to some value n, a reader log, it comes along and it decrements 1 at a time, writer comes along, it decrements the whole thing and causes everyone else to block.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so you can do that. The downside of that is, first of all, the semaphore has to be initialized to some value of n. That means that only at most n readers can go in at any time. Here we said unbounded. Okay? Approximation. What you have is an approximation of what one could allow. Okay? And then you have to ensure that once the writer comes along, it doesn't act, it has to wait for all the readers to finish and so on. Okay, so you could do something like that. Okay, what is a better way to do it? So I'm going to give a pseudocode answer. I'm not going to say how to do it with semaphore, but let's ask the intuition of what do we want to do. Okay. So basically, when a thread calls a read method, what should we do? Okay, the earlier solution that was being proposed was this, right? And I gave an example saying where is that fail? Where did it fail? We say that if there's a writer actually writing, you shouldn't let this happen. If there are no writers, this code is fine. Okay, yes.
Can you say if there is no log, then you can read?
So you're saying if there is no lock, I'm going to generalize that by saying if there is no writer.
Right.
Okay? If,
So you have like two locks and try to find
so if no writer do this, or what else do you, if there's a writer, then what do you do? If there's a writer, everyone has to block. Okay? So even a reader has to block. So the basic thing is if writer exists, then lock. Okay, pseudocode at the moment. We are not going to worry about it when we do semaphores or lock. Else, actually we should do while, but not it, but let's just call it it. Okay, so all that the reader has to do is extra check. First you'll check, is there a writer? Okay, if there is at least one writer, then don't proceed, just wait. Okay? So in fact you will say until there are no writers, don't do anything, and if once all the writers are done, there are no other writers in the system, then return I, then you are good. And any number of readers can go in. So long as there are no writers, readers can go in, this condition fails, so they all proceed concurrently. Okay? And this is the code for the writer. Okay, and then you just have to do an extra work here, saying you will have this, and then after you release it, you will say if reader is waiting, wake up. In fact, here is where we are going to wake them all up. So let them all proceed. Why only wake up one?
So monitor.broadcast kind of thing?
You could. So we haven't said how to implement it, but that's essentially, you want to implement it. Now you can see how to implement it with any construct I give. You want to do monitors, you will make this synchronized, and basically you will, at the end you will do notify all and wake up all of these guys. Here you are going to call this also synchronized, and then basically check this, and then you will go to sleep. If there is a writer, you will go to sleep. Actually, you will not make a synchronized, but I'll show you the code to do that. But essentially, we have the outline of what the solution will look like. You can do similar stuff with semaphores. Okay, so let me start showing you some code. Here is the code with semaphores, not yet condition variables. Okay, so to do it with semaphores, we are essentially going to use a mutex semaphore. That's essentially a lock, binary semaphore. we are going to basically have a special semaphore called write, which controls entry, okay, which is essentially going to do the same thing. We are going to track. The best thing is we are going to actually track how many readers and how many writers exist in the system. Okay, and by tracking that, we can figure out what is the right thing to do. Okay, so we'll set the number of readers to 0, we'll set the value of mutex to 1, we'll set this up. Both semaphores are initialized to 1. This is the code for writers. Okay, so basically you will just call lock, that's wait, and signal, that's lock acquire, lock release. Essentially what we said here. Okay. Here's the code for readers. Okay. So you'll grab a lock, not to do the read, you're grabbing a lock just to see whether a writer exists, whether I should sleep or not. Okay, that's what you're grabbing the lock. So you'll increment the number of readers. We are tracking the number of readers in the system. So you'll increment the number of readers. Okay? And you'll say, if I'm the first reader in the system, okay, I'm going to make the writers block. Because if there are threads, the other flip side of what I didn't say is if there is any thread reading already, you don't want the writer to proceed either. Okay? If there's a thread writing, you don't want the readers to proceed. There's a thread reading, you don't want the writer to proceed. Because if once the writer starts writing, there cannot be anyone else. Okay? So if you are the first reader, you will block off all the writers. Okay? And then you will release the lock. So this read is not protected by a lock, okay, essentially, because we are only using the lock to try and increment the number of readers and block any writers. Okay? And then you do the reverse. Once you're done reading, you decrement this reader is done, so you decrement it. If the number of readers goes to 0, for the last reader in the system, you unblock the writers. So if there's some writer waiting, it's time for that writer to go ahead because there are no readers left at this point. Okay. So all this simple solution is doing is it's keeping a counter to track how many readers are there in the system at any time. And based on the number of readers, you decide whether you want to block the writers or not. If there are no readers left, then you basically let the writer go. Yes, question.
So I'm kind of confused about WRT.wait, or like the first one.
What does that do? That's the problem. Question. Okay, so here this is a solution that is using semaphores. Okay, so what does this do? So you can try to understand it by going back to the definition of wait and signal, or you can do a very simple thing, which is what I said. This is a binary semaphore. In a binary semaphore, if you initialize the value to 1, wait is the same as lock acquire, release signal is the same as lock release. Okay, or you can just work to it and you can convince yourself that's what's actually happening. So you initialize it to 1, first thread goes in, it calls a wait, it immediately acquires a lock, it goes in, any so value goes to 0. Any other threads that go in, value goes to negative, so they are blocked. So this is simply working as a lock on the right method. Okay, so it's a binary semaphore equivalent to a lock. This was the definition of a binary semaphore. Yes.
This would work, but it looks to me like you could end up in a situation if you have a lot of readers reading constantly where the writer could get stuck waiting for the readers to finish and never be able to run.
Good observation. So observation being made is this is going to work, but if there are lots of readers that are in the system, writers will have to wait for a long period. Writers could in fact starve, right? Because what did we do? First reader came in, we incremented the count, and the reader immediately said, there's at least one reader, which is me. So I'm going to block the writer because mutual exclusion says if there's a reader, writers can go. Now once this happens, if there's a constant stream of readers going in, okay, so each of the reader will increment. So this count will not ever go back to 0 because there's always some reader in the system. So a writer will always stay blocked, cannot proceed. Okay? That's a good observation because this solution, as I will see in the next few slides, actually favors readers over writers. Okay? More importantly, this solution actually has a starvation problem for it. If readers dominate and outnumber writers, writers will starve. Okay? So it is going to work, but it doesn't have necessarily good property. First of all, it's not fair. You are favoring your readers over the writers. Second of all, it has starvation, which is even worse. because there may be writers that never make any progress. Okay. So there are some examples here of what happens when there are 3 threads, 2 reader threads and 1 writer thread. The first reader thread calls read, okay, that triggers this code. Okay, the reader count goes from 0 to 1. Okay, readers equal to 1 true, block off all the writers, and basically calls a wait on that semaphore. Remember that you had initialized that semaphore to 1. Okay. So why is that causing the writer to block? Because when the reader calls wait, the semaphore value goes to 0. So now if a writer comes along and calls wait, that causes that value to go negative, it blocks the writer. Okay, that's the reason by doing this wait, they blocked off all the writers. Okay, so the first reader comes along, so in this example, it will proceed if the count of readers has gone to 1. Next reader comes along, it will increment the count to 2. This doesn't go another block. So writer's already block is going to go read. So both reads are proceeding concurrently, and each reader will go and execute this part of the code. The value of readers will decrement. Okay, it will go from 2 to 1. The next one will actually make it go from 1 to 0. And you call a signal, you cause the read writer 1 block. So if that writer had actually executed while the reads were running, it was sitting there blocked. Okay, the last reader, okay, whichever one that is, will execute this code, unblock that writer. Okay, the writer will proceed. Okay, so you will have 2 readers executing concurrently. This writer, if it starts executing while either of those execute, it will be blocked. At the end of both the readers being done, the writer will proceed. Okay, that's the order in which things will happen. Scenario 2, writer comes in first, okay, readers come in later. Okay, so you see what happens here. The writer enters the critical section immediately because it's the only entity in the system. Okay, so let's say it's doing a write, and then the write is not yet done, the reader comes along. Okay, what should happen? Okay, the reader calls mutex wait, okay, increments the number of readers. Goes from 0 to 1. It is the first reader, and it calls wait to block a writer. What happens?
It doesn't block while it's writing.
Okay, so let's assume that this code is executing while the writer is actually in the critical section.
The block is already at 0 because the writer has it.
Yes.
So when the reader tries to call wait on the write block, the reader will end up waiting until the writer gets the name that signals the lock.
Yes, so remember that the reader is already in the critical section. It's called a wait. Value of the write semaphore has gone from 0 to 1 to 0. So when the first reader tries to block a writer, if there's already a writer, it will block instead. Because the writer will say, yes, you can block any subsequent writers, but I'm in the critical section. So wait has actually become, wait here makes the write semaphore go negative. So this reader blocks as it should. Because if you let it proceed, then you are in trouble. Because the writer is still writing and you let a reader go in and start reading. Okay. So this wait actually serves 2 purposes. It causes readers to block while a writer is writing, and it causes writers to block if the writer comes in subsequently. So there are 2 purposes here. I didn't actually write a longer comment saying block writer, or if there's already a writer, block yourself. That's really what's happening there. Okay. So there are a lot of subtleties here that you have to imagine what's going on. So, and this example 2 is actually a good one. Okay, now let's assume that R2 comes along. Writer is not finished, and this reader is blocked waiting for that writer to finish. So ask what happens then in this code. Yes.
Yeah, once it gets to the if statement, it just, since it's not 1, it'll skip the wait and it won't block and it'll attempt to read.
Okay, so is that a good thing? So there's an example, not example. Suggestion is if statement you won't block, so you'll go read. If the writer is not done, you shouldn't enter that. Okay, so you have to ask, is that really what's happening?
The second reader can only get there because in order to get there, it would have to have the mutex, and it can't get the mutex because the first reader has the mutex.
Yes. So So there's some subtlety here, right? So writer has write lock. It basically did write dot wait. First reader blocked here. Okay? It acquired this lock and it blocked here. Second reader comes along, it basically first tries to decrement this mutex, which is already held by reader 1, so it blocks here. Okay? So writer in there, first reader will block here, all other readers will block here. Okay? So the solution will work, but different threads will block at different places. Yes.
Doesn't it also prevent reader concurrency?
So does it prevent reader concurrency? While the writer is writing, there is no reader concurrency we will support.
Right, but when you call two readers first.
Yes. When you call two readers first, does it prevent reader concurrency? This is a small critical section. This could be a very long read. I could be reading a 1 gigabyte file. So this might take hours. This might take milliseconds, right? So it's all relative. So this part is a critical section. There's no concurrency here. This could be a long, slow operation. So you'll finish this. The assumption is this part will be done quickly if there are no other writers, and then you'll do a slow I/O. So there will be some concurrency. Okay, because we are talking about I/O. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so we have 15 minutes. So that was a solution. So scenario 2 is an interesting one. I would suggest that you go back and work through that and understand all the subtleties. Okay, why the code works, what does it do, and so on. Okay, I will skip scenario 3 because we have covered a lot of the hard problems. And then the discussion here actually says how does it work. The only thing that you want to take away here, I've explained all the cases of what happens in each of the scenario. The only take away here is basically this solution is the solution that favors readers. And you may have starvation. We want to see if we can change that. Is a different solution. And I will sort of upfront tell you that this flips it. It actually favors writers. Okay, it's not, neither of these are fair. Okay, so you will either have to favor readers or writers. Okay. With the code we have, we can of course come up with a different solution altogether. Okay. So what happens here? This is the code for write. So in this case, what you're doing is you want to favor writers. What does that mean? So what that means is if there are readers in the system and a new writer comes along, it blocks subsequent readers. So the way you are going to favor writers is, let's say you have a reader R1, R2, R3. First writer comes along, W1, then reader 4, reader 5, reader 6. In the previous solution, this gets to go, this gets to go, this gets to go, this one blocks, okay? But this still gets to go, this gets to go, this gets to go. So readers can keep going. Okay? There's no, they are not blocked, only the writer blocks. In this solution, what is going to happen is these three will actually enter the critical section, start reading. The writer comes along, it will block, but it will also block any subsequent reader. That's the code there. So it will say, since the solution is designed to favor writers, I am going to block all subsequent readers. Okay, because I want to go next. I got there first. Okay, so you are explicitly going to, so it will reduce your concurrency because in the previous solution there were 6 concurrent solutions. All those 6 threads could have gone with all at once. Here, the first set group gets to go in, the writer comes and blocks the next group. Okay? In fact, it not only blocks the next group, the solution is such that if another writer comes along here, this writer will actually get to jump over this because that's the way the solution works. It will let a stream of writers go in, and when all the writers are done, then all the readers will be unblocked. Okay, so that's basically what the solution does. And I think I'll just give the intuition, not go through every corner case to explain the solution. Okay. So there's a mutex there, that's a lock. You acquire a lock to increment. Here you are going to track the number of writers. Okay, so you will increment the number of writers. If I am the first writer, okay, I'm going to block all the readers. Okay. That's what happened here. If I'm the first writer, I'm going to basically call a read block.wait semaphore, which is going to subsequently block all the readers. Okay. Then I'm going to release that mutex. Here is the real lock that protects the write. That's the write block. Okay, and then we are going to basically decrement here, we decrement the number of writers. If the number of writers is gone to 0, I'll unblock all the readers. Okay. Whatever we did in the read function, we are now doing in the write function. With the one additional case that this writing, right, perform write also has a lock around it. In the reader case, it did not. Okay, so here is basically what a reader does. Okay, so basically you have to, the first statement is what makes all the difference. It says that if there's at least one pending writer, then I'm going to block. Okay, so this is how you actually blocked all the reader. And then here you're going to do the same kind of stuff. Increment the number of readers. For the first reader, you synchronize with the writers. Okay, and then you're going to do the read, you decrement, and you unblock the writer. You still want some concurrency and you don't want a writer to proceed if there are reads happening, so you have to block the writers if there are reads happening. Okay, but because we added this extra code, we are going to basically ensure that if once a writer comes, no subsequent readers can proceed. We block them explicitly using this. Okay, so that's really the way to get around it. Okay. But as I said, this is a little more fair than the previous solution, but not entirely, because after you block the writers, the solution actually allows other writers to sneak by the readers that are waiting. Okay, so that problem still exists. Okay, so code doesn't look very easy to write because we are doing semaphores, low-level construct. Okay, so I'm not going to go through the scenarios, but I'm going to show you how to write easy to understand code using Java. Okay, this is readers, writers using Java monitor, much simpler code. Okay, very easy to understand. So let's look at the, so that's the reader-writer class, and this is incidentally how we are going to implement read-write locks as well. Okay, you could basically, instead of read method, call, essentially this is an implementation of reader-writer lock. So we have two variables. We are going to track the number of readers and we are going to track the number of writers. Okay, num readers is initially 0, num writers is also initially 0. Okay. This is our read method. Okay. We'll call, note that it is not synchronized. Okay. If you make the read method synchronized, there is no concurrency. As soon as you make the read method synchronized, only one thread can enter. We don't want that. Okay, we'll see that the write method is synchronized, but the read method is not. Okay, so not synchronized. So all we do is we call this function prepare to read, which is right here. You do the reading, you call the function done reading. Okay, here is prepare to read. Okay, I'll come to this. Prepare to read is synchronized, but all you're doing is you are going to basically say if there is a writer in the system, wait. If there's some writer writing already, you can't proceed. Okay, so you'll call condition variable wait and you're done. Okay? And if there's no writer, it's fine for the reader to go in, so increment the number of readers. So if there are no writers, you'll just increment the number of readers and you'll basically start reading. Okay, here is the code for writers. You are going to basically call this synchronized. So write method is synchronized. Okay, only one writer can go in at any time, and you are going to call prepare to write, do the writing, done writing. Prepare to write is up there. You increment the number of writers and says if there is at least one reader, I can't write, I have to wait. So you're going to wait there, wait for the readers to be done, and then some reader will wake you up. And then here you are basically going to decrement the number of writers. Writing is done, you wake up the readers. Okay, simple code. Okay, so as you can see, by writing higher level, using higher level construct, your job is simplified. In particular, locks, etc. are built in, you just use synchronize. So, any questions, observations about the code? Comments on is it fair, does it work, is it horribly unfair?
No, again, this is my favorite procedures.
So the code is going to favor the readers. Okay, so why would you believe that is to be the case?
Because the writer can just wait until the readers is
Okay. So writers will wait until the queue of readers is empty. Okay, because once a reader comes along, okay, you are basically, writers are going to wait. So it has the same issue as earlier this question.
So the slightly more fair way of doing it be once have in the prepare to read method, once number of writers is become anything but zero, actually force it to wait, and so it won't be able to keep adding readers into the queue until a writer gets to go through and do its thing.
So observation is that in this case, if the number of writers, so as soon as the number of writers is not zero, you also want the subsequent readers to wait, which is not happening here. Okay, so you want to do that and make it more fair. But I have another question, which a subtle observation. Okay, so here the read method is not synchronized, but the prepare to read and prepare to write, prepare to read and done reading are synchronized. And if you look at this method, you will see that the write method is synchronized, but those two methods are not synchronized. Is there something we should conclude from this? Why is it written in this funny way? Why not make these two methods also synchronized?
Because if you did no writers could prepare to write while another writer was writing,
Okay.
and or no writers could prepare to write while something was reading.
So suggestion is if you did that, no writer could prepare to write if some writer is already in there. That's something else too.
No, I think because it's synchronized, it doesn't matter the function if they're synchronized or not, because the only way to get to them is by doing the only thread.
Okay. Another suggestion or comment is because this parent method is synchronized, there is no need to make anything inside synchronized because you are already holding a lock. Okay, so if you have a parent method that already holds a lock, there is no need to make any other method that you are calling, try to grab a lock. In fact, if you did that, you will deadlock. Because if you made that method synchronized, your thread will come in, it will grab the lock, it will go in here, it will try to grab that lock again. You already hold that lock. If you try to grab a lock that you already hold, you will lock forever. It's like saying I do lock acquire, and then I do another lock acquire. Guaranteed deadlock. Right? So you basically already hold the lock, you again block, and then you are basically in trouble. Yes.
So basically, every time you use the keyword synchronize, it's using the same mutex.
Yes. Synchronized by definition associates an internal mutex with the object. Okay, whenever you do synchronize internally, the JVM is doing a lock acquire here for you. You don't see all that. That's the code that's generated internally. Okay. So there's an internal lock that the synchronized keyword is causing the JVM to declare, and it's already grabbed the lock for you. So if you try to grab it again, you are going to deadlock. Okay, so put another way, never write Java code where one synchronized method calls another synchronized method. That's always going to cause a deadlock. So if one synchronized method calls another one that's also synchronized, you're basically trying to grab the lock twice, which you cannot do. Okay, so this is something that you should never do. Okay, so just some side bits on how to use the monitors in Java and appropriately. But that said, I think we have to ensure that the solution is fair and so on. This is just one solution. You want to ensure. So if you want to make it fair, you have to first define what you mean by fairness. Okay? Does fairness mean, one way to do fairness is you always do FCFS. First come, first serve. One group of reader goes through first, the writer goes next, another group of reader goes next, and the next writer goes. So if you go in this order, that may be fair. Okay? If you let this writer block these readers but let other writers sneak in, that's not fair. Okay? So if you want to say fairness, you better define what you mean by fairness and then try to write code that meets those properties. Okay? We never defined what fairness was. I just threw it out as a vague term, and we just thought that life should be good for readers and writers, but didn't say in what way it should be good. Okay, but it's better to define it. Okay, so you can, so this solution may not do that. You can, of course, write other extra stuff here to get that kind of property. Okay, so I will conclude with one last comment here, which is the very first comment that was made there saying, let's solve this with read-write locks. Yes, they do exist in Java. You basically just call the read lock and the write lock. In pthreads, you actually declare a read-write lock instead of a normal lock, and then you can either grab the lock in read mode. So you say, I want a read lock on this lock, or I want a write lock. That does the same thing for you. Okay? So if you had that construct, your code would be very simple. You will say read writer would just say write log dot acquire, write log dot release. The reader will go in and say read log dot acquire, read log dot release. Internally, read logs and write logs are essentially doing this. Okay, whatever I showed you here, they'll track the number of read logs requests, write log requests, they'll make one thread or the other thread block. Okay, so here we sort of squeezed it into all into one solution, but this is the kind of stuff that's happening internally when you implement read and write. So the exercise was not only to show how to solve readers writers, but also show you how read write logs are implemented internally. Okay? So you could use either of these two constants. So typically you won't do what I just showed you. You would actually just call the right abstraction and say that's how, because somebody else wrote the library for me, I'm not going to do the work. Okay, just use the right abstraction. Okay, so the next slide is Dining Philosopher, which I'm just going to introduce, and we'll come back to the solution next time. So this is the next concurrency or synchronization problem. Okay, this is called a Dining Philosopher problem. Also, something that Dijkstra had come up with a long time ago. This discussion of all the contributions that Dijkstra made, this was one of the main. Okay. Problem is as follows. Okay, so we assume that there are, in this case, 5 philosophers sitting around the table. Okay. And philosophers do only 2 things. They think and they eat. So when they eat, they don't think. When they think, they don't eat. So, and this is how the table is laid out. Okay, so there's a plate and there are 2 forks, and there's a bowl of spaghetti, so you need 2 forks, not 1. Okay. And so if you get hungry, you have to grab both the forks, your left fork and the right fork, and you start eating. The forks are unfortunately shared, not the most hygienic way to eat, but that's the way you're going to eat. Okay. So the problem is this is a fork is a shared resource. Okay. And you want to solve this problem in a way that if multiple philosophers get hungry, there is a way by which they can grab their left fork and the right fork and eat. So you don't want a scenario where everybody goes and reaches out to the left fork all at once. They all get hungry at once, and they all grab the left fork, and now they try to grab the right fork. The right fork is held by your neighbor, so now nobody gets to it. Everybody starts to get it. It doesn't work. Okay? And so you don't want a problem where you have deadlock. That's a deadlock problem, so you cannot get to eat. Okay? And yet you want fairness. If multiple philosophers get hungry, they get to go one after another in some reasonable way. They all get to eat and so on and so on. Okay? So this is basically a way of sharing resources between multiple processes. Okay, here philosophers represent processes. The problem is just made interesting so we can at least try to understand what happens. Okay? So next time we will actually solve the Dining Philosopher's problem. Okay?